Good morning and welcome to this month's virtual lecture. As a reminder, this lecture is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. My name is James Reid. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Jem Midgley, who's in our Perth office. Jem will be showing some workflows for working with public data to generate a greenfields project using Geoscience ANALYST Pro. It's like doing exploration without getting your boots dirty. We're all familiar with that in COVID times. Anyway, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the Q&A. Please be aware that Jem may wait until the end to answer the question. Take it away, Jem.
Thanks, James. When we're looking for a greenfields project, it can be searching an underexplored area or reassessing an old area for a new commodity. In Australia, this also means utilising techniques that assist in seeing through cover. I've picked this area, which is a good spot to do a desktop study because it's more than 700 kilometres away from any city, and that does depend on your definition of a city. So the data sets that we'll be looking at are in this yellow square over here. We have provided by the government pre-competitive data sets that allow us to have a look at a crustal scale. I've got some data sets here where we've got some MT and seismic data. These pre-competitive data can be used to improve understanding of mineral resource prospectivity, but it's a good spot to be doing a regional studies. Here I've got some seismic data, which you just drag and drop it to load it into Analyst, and I've also got some MT data. So the MT data can be a little more complicated. They've been provided in an SGRID format, which doesn't currently load directly into Analyst. These data were loaded into GoCAD and saved in a GeoH5 format, which does just drag and drop straight into Analyst. Models like these, 3D models, have lots of visualization functionality. So what we're looking at here is the interpreted MT data that's been provided by the various government agencies in Australia. And this is the resistivity data in a full 3D model. With these block models, there's lots of options to visualize sections as well as volumes, and we can just scroll through these data having a look for areas of interest. So what we're looking at in the volume here, you can make a full volume and you can reduce the size of that into various areas of interest to have a look at the data in detail that you're interested in interpreting. So in these volumes here, the blue, which is resistive data, is giving us an indication of areas that might be shear zones, and there's also so we're wanting to map those to look for deep tapping structures that might be potential fluid flow zones in the mineralizing system, and the high conductivity areas are things that we'd be looking to investigate for to outline conductive stratigraphy in areas where we wouldn't be able to find these deep conductors using other techniques such as airborne because they might be masked by surface conductivity. So this is real regional scale investigations to see what areas might be of interest. So in order to just have a look at the types of things that we might be interested in, we can just scroll through these section lines and find areas that would potentially be of interest for the mineral system that we're looking for. And we can actually do an interpretation here on the screen. There are some functions in Analyst Pro that let us digitize, and so we can actually just as very rough-handed as it is, we can just start digitizing some things on the screen here, and highlight these as conductive stratigraphy. We can move along to some other areas, and if we're trying to outline the potential fault zones, we can just make some interpretations like that, and we can continue to scroll through the model and make those interpretations on other section lines. And as you continue to interpret through the body, you can find other areas that are of interest. So there's some more conductive zones over here and some deep resistive areas. So it's quite simple in here just to continue making these interpretations as you go along, and then they can be used to assist in the area that you are looking for. So all of those just get saved as objects in your project as you go along. So that's a way of having a look at interpreting the MT at a very regional scale. I'll turn off those contours and we'll have a look at the seismic data. Just turn on. So for context, this is the little tiny ribbon of seismic in here. So that gives you an understanding of the scale of the data that's being provided here. This is 30 kilometre deep. So this seismic line is considered stratigraphic crustal scale. So we're looking at a much deeper profile with the MT. So I'll just zoom in on the seismic, and because it's much longer than it is deeper, we can just change the exaggeration there. And we'll have a look at this seismic data. This will give us an idea of looking for areas that might have deep tapping structures. So with no disrespect to proper seismic interpretation, this is the 30-second version of already processed seismic data. We can scan through this with it in Analyst. If we spin it round in 3D, we can see that it is plotting with its crooked acquisition path so that we know that things are in the right location. We can pan across through this area, looking for areas of interest that might show some reflectors that represent some structures that might have deep tapping fluid pathways, or changes in orientation and dip of the reflectors on a broad scale that might give us an understanding of tectonic history of basin inversion and things like that. So there's some reflectors in here that are dipping off this way. We can pan across and see that there are some major structures in here. There are packages of reflective areas. We might also be looking for, if our search area is for IOCGs, rare earths, pegmatites, tin deposits, they all need structures above intrusions. So we will also be looking for dull areas within the seismic data that might represent intrusions and then faults coming off of those. So we can see deep tapping reflectors down here that are of different orientation than that end. And as you scan through, there's lots of interesting deep structures through here. You can see reflective packages. And when you get all the way down to this end, there is some interesting material over here, and then some deep, lots of flat-lying reflectors over here, which is a deep sedimentary package. So in terms of picking an area for an exploration project, we would be definitely interested more in this central area. So we could go in, zoom in here and look at the reflectors in more detail and see where exactly we were wanting to look for, but very broad brush, we just want to find a box in here in the middle. Again, you can digitize that if you want, but you can also that was very poor typing. You can have a look in that area in there. Geographically, you can see down in this viewport from that outline that I created there, it gives you the coordinates of your area of interest. So once you've got that area of interest, you're back off to the internet, the geological surveys and the database searches that are available to find what other data might be available in that area. What I have found here, we can see there is some magnetic data. This has come off the South Australian Geological Survey portal. This is SARIG. They have made a lot of data sets available. This compilation you can see over here is a gridded data format, and it is showing that there is a blue outline on this data set. So what that is coming from is a very low null value within the data set. So down the bottom in the information for each of the cells here, we can see that there is a very low null value. So if we just edit this table, we can copy that null value and turn it into an actual null. So we replace that value with a no data value. Sure, there we go. And now all of that border on the outline there has disappeared, so that this TMI data is showing that we can see lots of information through the various areas of interest. We can turn on the seismic and the MT data that we had a look at, but it is the outline of our area of interest is sitting in here from the seismic data, and you can turn the seismic data on and see where it lines up. One of the important things that we need to think about when we're getting data off the internet is where we've actually stored, got that information from. We need to retain the metadata to make sure that we actually have a trail on that. Underneath the property information here for the grid, we can add comments in here. So these can be comments about what we've done to the data. If we want to comment to other people that might be using this data later, but there's also the opportunity to add in web URLs in here. And once we have comments on these data sets, they sit in here in the project tree to show you that there is a comment associated with it. So if you want to add a comment with the URL of the location that you got the data from, that will stay with the data. The other thing to do is to load in the acquisition reports. You can use the add file button here, or you can just drag and drop from your window explorer, and it will indicate in this column here if there are reports associated with that, and that stays with the analyst project. So when we're looking at regional or terrain scale selection criteria, these will differ depending on your commodity and your deposit style and the mineral system model. But if we go for a very simple gradients are good, we're looking for edges in the data sets. And derivative products are quite good at looking for those sorts of edges. You can see from the rest of the data that I've got sitting here that RTP and first vertical derivative products were provided by the SARIG database, but if they weren't, there are functions available within Analyst to actually create those functions. So the Fourier transforms are available through here. there is a first vertical derivative as well as an RTP calculation. So you can do those within Analyst if they're not provided. So the other data sets that we've got in here, there is the TMI first vertical derivative. It's showing, so there we go. So there's the first vertical derivative. And we also have the reduced to pole magnetics. Radiometric data was also available. And the other products in here are all grids as well as a core scale gravity stitch. So once we've got all of these data sets, instead of just having a look at them as plain images like this, what we want to be able to do is interrogate all of the data together. So we might be looking at some of the line interpretation on the first vertical derivative of the magnetics, but we want to have a look at that against the actual values for the radiometrics data. So there's lots of boundaries in here that we might be interested in having a look at, but we want to do it with all the data sets together. As grids, these are all just looking like 2D plan view data. So in order to interrogate all of these data, one of the methods of doing that is to make a block model. So we can just digitize an outline for an area of interest. Again, just using the digitizing tools in Analyst, we can just zoom in and find an area of interest. And this is just to use as a guide to build the block model. Now, the other trick for young players is to make sure you're in parallel orthogonal mode when you're digitizing. And there is also a snap function. If you have multiple windows open, you might want to snap to the actual surface that you're, or a slicer, a vertical cross section, or a plan view. You can snap to any of the objects. So this is our area of interest. You can see down here again, the nodes are showing the actual coordinates. So this has snapped to the Z of 0, which is where the data is sitting. Now this is an editable table, so you can go in and make these round numbers, but we are just using this outline as a guide to make the block model, just so that we've got some idea of how big it is. So that's under the utilities menu. We just make a block model designer, and we can create the block model by clicking on where we want the origin to be and then choosing how big we want that block model to be. Now this is all editable, so you can jump back in here and make these nice round numbers. I want that to be 25, and that might be 10. Now in Z, we don't actually need very many cells because most of this data is in 2D at this point. The other thing that we can do is have a look at the grid's cell size to determine what cell size we want in here. But just to keep some nice round numbers, we'll put those in at 100, and we can make the Z. We just need a few of those. And this will make our block model. So now we've got a block model area of interest here. Get rid of the outline and turn off the potassium. Now we can see, we zoom in, that's all the grid lines for our block model. So now that we've got a block model, we need to populate that with data. Again, going back up to the utilities menu up here, there is a transfer data option. So the source of the data, we can either choose from the drop down, or if you want to make it more visual, if you have the data turned on, you can just click on the actual data, select the property that you want. The destination again is your block model, and you transfer that data across. So then you can follow suit with all of the other properties. Each of these grids has the, we've got the RTP, we've got the first vertical derivative. There are multiple bands from the radiometric data. And then there is also the gravity data, which is a bit more coarse. And of course, that's much slower when you do it in a demo. So I will open up the one that oh no, it's not slow at all. I was waiting for the message that told me it was done. So it's obviously done much quicker. So we can transfer the data from the radiometrics. So that gives you the thorium, and that will transfer the data. There we go. So that's actually reasonably quick. We can get the RTP. So you can see that that can be done for all of them. This can also be done between each of the grids. So the data sets here that were provided from the government survey have a separate grid for each property. If there are multiple properties on the grid here, you can select them all at once. So if you have one grid with the 3 mag properties on it, you can transfer those all at once. I will just open up the one that I have already done, just to save time here. So this is going to slow things down. That's not what I was wanting. We'll wait for that one to load. But whilst that is loading, I can show you that we've got the data all on one block model now, with all of those properties co-located. One of the things that we can do is run a calculation on those properties. So if we have a look at the block model that I've got here, off. Tag off. So this is showing the 1VD within that block model. And we've also got the radiometric data in here. If we're looking, exploring for something like light rare earth deposits, we might want to have a look at some radiometric ratios. So we can just apply a script in here. There's another option to, under the utilities menu, we can type in what we want, the title of that. That's just the output name, what the actual property is going to be called. And then we can run a calculation on that using the names of the properties as they are on the object. So we can make we can just run that script and it will produce another property by running a calculation on that data. Let's square that up a bit. So you can see there that these areas may be of interest for that particular ratio. So this gives you an idea of the benefit of having the data on a grid, is that you can actually run calculations on it and you can transfer data into other objects. So the other data that we have are images. Now, images are not as useful because the only thing you can do with those is visualize them or make them transparent. Not sure why that one is taking so long to load. But the only thing that we can do with those images, there we go, I'm just in the wrong, zoomed out too far. So this is the radiometric ternary diagram, again, provided off the government website. We can't really do anything with that other than visualize it and make it transparent, unless we've got a surface. If we have a surface in our project, we can actually drape the image onto that. So if we go back to the rest of the data sets that we got from the government site, we have the airborne survey produced a radar elevation plot. If we turn that one on, we can see the elevation data in here, and because it's gridded, we can right-click on the grid and we can create a surface from data. So this is pre-filled, and we can see from the information in the bottom down here that this grid is an 80 by 80 grid. So I'm just going to name this M80, and that will go and build that digital elevation model surface for us. Once we've got that surface, we'll be able to drape some images on it. Turn off the grid. So I've got a cool image here, which is the radiometrics data that has been created by Mark Grugig, but made available through the SARIG data set. It's a normalized radiometrics image, which it will be great if I can, there we go. So this image, I'll just drape it straight onto the topography. So this is our DEM surface. Over here, there's the option to paint any of these images. So I've got this enhanced image of the radiometrics where each object, it shows the dominant component of each of the pixels by normalizing the log of each component. So this is an image enhancement, which you can run you can run the calculation because it's just a normalized log using a script, or now you can actually drape it onto the topography. So if we look at this in 3D, we can pretend that we're not in the desert and that there is some topography. So there's the option there to change the vertical exaggeration and investigate that enhanced data set with the topography surface that we've just created from the grid. And now the last bit of data that we have from the government here is a gravity grid. Now it's quite a coarse scale. So if I turn off the surface here. So the gravity data is quite coarse. And so given the detail that we've got in the radiometrics, you might actually want to visualize this as contours rather than within the block model. And that's possible here by clicking on the contours. You can choose how many contours you want. You can, we'll just pick 10 here. Those contours look reasonable. We can just create a curve object, which will create the object within Analyst from the actual property on that grid. That has created them down here. They're a new object. If I turn off the grid, the contours stay and they're colored by the property that created them. And it is possible to just drape those onto another surface. So again, you can put those onto the topography. Right, so now that you can interrogate all of your data together within this block model with all of the data co-located, one of the neat features with using block model data like this is to look at the different properties that you've got within the one block model together. And one of those functions in Analyst over here is to do what we call property blending. So you can have a look at, say, the first vertical derivative and the potassium data from the radiometrics or any of the other enhanced properties that you've got. And you can change the contribution of each of those just by sliding the bar over here. So this is blending those two properties within each of the cells on the fly. And all of the other sort of interp functions are still available if you want to make some outlines. You can sort of digitize onto that block model and see where the detailed areas of interest are in there. So now that you've got all of the data co-located within that block model, you can actually export it out. You've got all of the information down here. You can see all of the different properties in here. You can go out and include any other data that you can find, whether it's ASTA, airborne EM, any other data sets that you can find. You can add into the block model. You can put in further depth slices, obviously, when you've got drilling and additional data. And all of this can be saved out in an ASCII point set as a block model, and it can even be brought back into Analyst, and you can utilize things like the k-means clustering on the point set, or you can take all of those attributes and put all of the points into ioGAS and go to town looking at more detailed analytics on that. So that, as I mentioned, ioGAS before James pulls the kill switch on me for going overtime. It wouldn't be right if I didn't show some geochem data. So there's a wealth of information out there. In here we have some samples. Gone. There are some, I've lost my geochem samples. Right, let me open the other project. Okay, so here is the data with the geochem samples in it. Within the block model that's sitting here, the data that's available from the government. There are rock samples that sit all the way out here that all have geochem associated with them. That's all freely downloadable. And some of the holes even have high logger data on them. So that's another data set that you can load in. But if you're going to do a geochem orientation study, you would want to go across your block model and maybe even extend it further than that. Once you've got your drilling or soil sampling information, you can then interrogate that through ioGAS. You just connect to the ioGAS instance. It tells you that you are connected to ioGAS. I will drag it in from my other screen. Once you're in ioGAS, you just open the link data, and it knows that there are multiple samples in there. I just choose the point set that I'm interested in, and obviously with limited screen access, you can see the points in here are highlighted. That means that they are connected to ioGAS. We can select the variables. We might be looking at light rare earth elements. So we can plot those up and see if there are high values, if there's any correlations in some of these mineral hosts, or if we're looking for alteration intensity diagrams, we can have a look at a molar ratio. So this generalized element ratio we can do because this is for acid data. We can have a look at something like the, I'll just call these altered. We can make them bigger. So if we just find some large points here, using the ioGAS select functionality, we can just highlight some of the highly altered samples in here. And within ioGAS, that's made them big and red. And that is linked directly across to analyst. So if I just move ioGAS out of the way again, you can see that those samples are highlighted in red. You get the ioGAS data set over here, and that gives you an idea of where the more altered samples are within that data set. So there's another functionality within analysts that you can see to combine all of the different information within any of the data sets that you can get. So the correlations and advanced interp that you might want to do with spectral data, wireline, all of that can be done reasonably cheaply and effectively from public data sitting at home on your desktop. That was very quick and rushed, and that's all I was going to show you today. I'll pass it back to James for any other questions that people might have.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Gem, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. For those of you who are still in the lecture, we'll give you about 30 seconds to type any questions that you have. And if you have any questions in the future, please don't hesitate to contact support@mirageoscience.com or contact Gem or I directly if you know us. And I'll just say, while I'm giving people a chance to type their questions into the chat, join us next month when Jennifer Levette will demonstrate 3D drill hole design and monitoring in the brand new release, which is Geoscience ANALYST Pro version 4.0. That lecture will take place in Canadian Pacific time on the 12th of May at 11 AM. And I can just point out that this presentation has been recorded. It will be available in a few days on our YouTube channel. So if you just Google go into YouTube and search for Mira Geoscience and Geoscience Analyst, you'll find all the virtual lectures that have ever been recorded. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. So we've got a couple of questions. There's one question about, can you plot drill holes and make cross sections? And the answer to that, Gem, I'm going to answer for you. You certainly can plot drill holes. So it imports just a standard collar survey and from to or continuous data files. So you can import lithology or geophysical logs or whatever. So it's got very powerful drill hole visualization. So Gem's just importing some in the background while I talk. And just showing the import screen. You can't make a cross section per se. You can view data in cross section, but it's really a 3D visualization tool. So that isn't a particular function yet. There are ways of viewing the models and profiles of data in cross-section using the 2D cross-section viewer or the slicer, as Gem is demonstrating now. So the software itself is freely downloadable for the viewer, which allows you to import your own data and also do all this visualization that Gem has been showing you. You just can't do the sort of any sort of operation that actually changes the data, like the calculations and things like that are not part of the free viewer. And the Pro version is very cost effective at $1,000 US or $995 US per year. So it's a subscription license. So and the Geoscience Analyst, if you don't already have it, can be downloaded from the Mira Geoscience website. If you're really interested in getting hold of it, please contact either support or info@mirageoscience.com or contact Gem or I directly. Okay, so that's basically, I think I've covered the questions there. Gem, thanks very much. Thanks to everyone who's joined us. We'll see you again next month.